Okay, feel free to move. I don't know about.
Say, the agenda just disappeared on me, so. Yeah, apparently today is my day of not doing things right, so.
You're browsing in the guest.
Yeah, join.
Just browsing as a guest now.
Me too.
Already messaged him an hour early saying I was gonna be late, so it's been one of those days.
An hour and a half.
Yeah, an hour and a half.
Well, I showed up.
I was driving back from Holland and I was like,
for
oh my
the
god,
Soccer game.
we had a meeting go an hour over in full day.
I'm the
before
coach.
that. I don't know what it was.
Oh,
It wasn't for the
And it
game,
just-
it was for, cause I told him to be there
My brain
early.
was set that long.
Sorry, I'm not the one who did this.
Close enough.
So
That's fine.
sure why it is.
A sweater.
Well, I was gonna say. If he's not gonna show up.
I need my
you fine with
sweater.
that?
Do we have a quorum?
Yeah.
Quorum?
we
Alright.
have a quorum, we have four.
What about?
I want to be that guy.
I don't know where.
Why does that say Perry Hopkins?
I don't know.
Does it say that on the
Might not
outside?
on the
No,
outside.
mine says damn somebody, so.
Oh,
You are now officially Jerry Paul.
I like to be somebody else for a while, could I?
Well, we know we're not gonna have Jerry. The other two are coming late. So there should be five with.
I was gonna come an hour early, but I was gonna be.
I mean, we
10
have a
minutes
quorum.
late when I did it.
Yeah, I haven't heard from them. Okay. On both on with plan. One.
Is that us? That's the participant, or someone else?
That'll be us.
Right.
All right. Obviously not a very controversial agenda. So we'll get started then. I'll call the meeting to order. 7:02. And we'll have the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag
Flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call. Ms. Atchison.
Here,
Mr. Hall informed me that he is busy this evening taking care of a family member. Mr. Hope,
Present?
Mr. Merlington, we haven't heard from. Ms. Naparowski. Mr. Nixon also we haven't heard from. And to my knowledge, and Mr. Conley is here. Mr. Moore, our city planner, is back with us tonight. We're happy to see you. And apparently we have Mr. Womack doing double duty as city manager and clerk. So as you asked earlier, we'll speak slowly and probably in small syllables. We have some minutes from the regular meeting from August 9th. We've got a chance to look at them. Of course, while I was looking at everyone else's computer not working properly, mine went away, so let's see if I can find it myself. But that should be on page 3 of the packet. Is there anything that we need to address on here, or are we good to go with well, not last month's minutes, but August 9th's minutes?
Make a motion to approve last, or August. minutes.
second.
Anything we need to discuss on that? Hearing nothing, all in favor of approving the agenda, you signify with aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Okay. Then we, of course, we have tonight's agenda. We need to approve.
Make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
Support.
Anything on here we need to dig deeply into? Or change or amend or anything like that? Hearing nothing, all in support of approving tonight's agenda, please signify with aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries, the agenda is approved. This is the time for public comments. I'm not seeing any public online or in the audience. So let's move on. Conflicts of interest or ex parte communication inquiry. I'm not sure that we have any business before us tonight that where we could have a conflict of interest, but if you can think of any, here's your opportunity to let us know. Okay. Moving on, item 8. There's no scheduled public hearings. Item 9, there's no scheduled site plan reviews. Taking us all the way to item 10, other business. Item A, under other business, is review and discuss the proposed industrial building facade requirements ordinance. And when you are ready, Mr. Womack, or I guess Mr. Moore, whoever wants to handle this, you want to refresh where we're at with this and what we should be doing? Whoever wants to take that.
Sorry, just give me 1 second, my.
Yeah,
my
'cause you're
computer
busy.
fell. Guess I'll page number.
Oh, let me scroll.
Yeah, so this is mostly Mr. Moore's work, I think. I did ask him to put together, his interpretation of the non-residential design requirements, specifically the industrial facade, work that we've been working on. I think the only question that I had was we did do some previous work on this. And I think part of it was we wanted to make sure that there was a cap, a body, and a base to ensure that there was, 3 separate elements to eliminate the kind of slab-sided metal building. When I talked with Mr. Moore about that, he indicated that he felt that what he's provided to you would prevent that. I have to admit, I didn't have as much time to analyze this as I would like to. So I guess I will leave it to Mr. Moore to explain to you how he thinks it will work. And I guess you guys can talk about any changes you'd like to maybe see.
So the draft amendment on, starting on page 832 552, so this is the entire section of the ordinance with that. So as we've been working on this, I think there's a few different things that we can talk about, as we kind of do this. So we specify under subsection B this for commercial, industrial, or other buildings. Most of this text on page 8 and particularly on page 9 is the same as it is for page 8. So we add glass as a building type in a couple of areas. We also added some flexibility on page 9 to building materials. It would permit exterior siding or beers that may be permitted by the may require application by the samples of proposed siding. So the intent here is to allow for some flexibility in what's being proposed, but still giving you sort of the discretion to accept or not accept cheaper to durable. Architecture is largely unchanged. Here we added some language here to allow for minimal corporate components of various discussion. So that's kind of a challenging topic sometimes, because sometimes corporate brand and color scheme looks for something that's not desired by the city. And so having the planning commission can have some discretion as far as what require and what the most significant changes begin on page 10 of the packet, page 3 of the amendment. So subsection 4, which is the continuation of the discussion of architecture, discusses exterior HVAC and mechanical systems. That what we started to do last month, we built on that a little bit. We added this separate section, subsection C, that pertains only to industrial systems. So as I've been working on this, it's thinking about ways that we might be able to simplify some of this language, both just in terms of how the section is organized. The previous section also covered industrial in addition to commercial buildings. This one kind of narrows that focus down further to only talk about industrial buildings. So we, and some of this language should be familiar to you, so subsection one requires the local company to talk about that. Subsection two is this base body cap language that the Womack did propose. I don't have a concern about it. My comment was that he and I discussed this. I'm thinking that there are probably some examples of pretty good looking industrial buildings that may not violate this just because of how they decided to build it. There might be I think that we can keep it because we do allow some flexibility in subsection C below, but my overarching comment on this was wondering if that language is wanted to keep you to get picture for the I think that's kind of the discussion point of my here what an appropriate level of guidance. Subsection 3 says in addition to or replacing those materials, design shall utilize high quality materials such as brick, wood, stone, so basically, again, not a bunch of sheet metal boxes, but something that's built with a little more character and a little more integrity. We also have this 8-2, which allows the planning commission to accept something else that's not specifically. So there's obviously technologies emerging for different trends in terms of architectural design that you don't really like that might otherwise be prohibited by this language. So the intent under APP is to approve something else that consider these 4 standards. So have a property, considering scale, building, area, setbacks, and landscaping, and quality of the last couple items here on the next page, which is page 11 of the packet, page 4 of the ordinance. We have some language here where building materials that are susceptible to damage will be prohibited on the lower 3 feet of the building. It's basically case for so think about this, we've all been around some industrial building that's in a parking lot and somebody accidentally like keep out of the forklift or something. Gets all banged up, it gets rusted, stuff like that. So effort to kind of clean up that look of where it meets the ground. Acquiring a different type of material there or some kind of landscape separation. So as to avoid the truck backing into the forklift, taking up the building. Section 4 here addresses that kind of situation where requiring a different material or a 3-foot landscape separation. So section 5 talks about building colors, very well, areas, low reflective, subtle blue colors, colors. Doesn't happen a lot, but we don't want to break yellow building. Then the last one just requires that if some of these buildings contain an office component to them, so a lot of them are 75% warehouse, or 75% storage, etc. So the office component windows and a lot of natural light. One, it's a better office environment for the workers, and 2, it does. So this is where we're at currently with the draft. So I think the feedback that we were seeking from the planning commission was overall reaction to this, whether areas were being too restrictive or not restrictive enough. Was this confusing? Simplify this further. Kind of what I'm looking for as a planner, and of course, Mr.
So if I could ask a few questions. So Mr. Moore, under C2, the part with the base body and cap. So I pulled that language out of somebody else's ordinance. And I'm not opposed to some other simplified version of this. But I felt that this was a fairly simple way to say, hey, look, you have to have some variation. Which again is consistent. The last sentence there, the base and cap shall be clearly distinguishable from the body, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have suggestions or recommendations for ways to simplify that, but still be able to require them to have clearly discernible changes, you know, in the building style?
Yeah, so I think, one of the challenges with this, so this solves it, but sometimes I think it's a bit expected. When communities are looking for not even access building, they'll say, sure, we'll just put a big green stripe down the middle. And that's not what we want to do. So I think, to me, a lot of this can be, the variation of material can help us, you know, possibly more than where the base body cap. And I don't only comment on the base body and cap is that there might be vertical elements that don't really have that sort of three-level effect going up, and the vertical components and the other architectural types of features that don't maybe qualify as a base body and cap, but still meet the overall intent here. So I don't know exactly how to articulate that. At this point in time, I'm just thinking about not wanting to discourage or eliminate a design that you would otherwise accept because we have this sort of where
Could be as simple as saying, you know, they'll have discernible base body and cap or other interesting architectural design work or I mean, interesting problem architectural work there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can come up with something that's simpler. It might be more, so the benefit of this is that it's less subjective, right? So you could say, you know, shall provide, you know, variation in terms of building materials and colors and blah, blah, blah. But if that's the opposite side of that coin, is something to take advantage of. So, okay, we'll have, you know, 3 feet of bricks here, and then some horizontal paneling here, and some vertical paneling there and there. Got 3 different things, and it's potentially interesting. It doesn't provide the builder much guidance. So this comes up a bunch of times. Not just architecture, comes up sometimes with like landscaping, where the objective language is helpful and allows the planning commission to like common sense, and use that sort of judgment, but at the same time, doesn't provide more strict objective standards. It makes it easier from an administrative standpoint as a construction. I don't know historically if you're have too many issues with allowing that kind of flexibility, maybe it's fine. But I think that's kind of the thought process for me at least. You want something that's more objective and possibly more restrictive, or something that's probably more flexible, but it also has subjective standards. At times could be more difficult to get.
For this board, do you like the base body cap language? Do you want to add something that would allow you to accept something that's not base body and cap?
Could we amend the language and say something along the way of one example of an acceptable design is a base body and cap, but others could be considered if they provide suitable variation. That way we could point builders to what we're looking for, but knock us out if you got some other idea.
The goal of this is just to make sure we don't have a plain building.
Yeah, so if you guys are familiar with White Creek Avenue, about halfway between 16 and 17 Mile Road, there are some storage buildings on the west side of the road. They're slab sided. They're basically pole barns. They look horrible in my opinion. There's about 10 of them. So And then you look across the street at the Jade Farms building, which is got minimal, change to that. It's, it's almost slab sided. But it has an entryway, it's got some different colors and variations. It does have, I don't think it has a base, but it does have a body and a cap.
Base is the only one that I'm like, not a hill to die on for me. I don't think the base is big, but I do think the cap is important because it does create an outline in the building and something that breaks up the facade. So I don't know if the base is one that's killing me, but definitely the cap would be something that would be important to include on here.
So the thing about the base is oftentimes you want to have or encourage them to have either brick or some kind of mortar on the bottom 3 feet, because it's a much more substantial building that way. Although I guess under this ordinance, it wouldn't be required.
Further down, doesn't it, it's over there.
So I think it was, I mean, right now, this does require the base lighting cap. Language further down requires either something more substantial that's 3 feet off the ground or setback. So language where there's requirement for a stone or concrete building material, so it's written in areas where it comes right down. Right up against the parking lot or loading area. That's what that is required. Not required if you're gonna build 3 or 4 foot wide landscape.
I keep going back to where we originally started this, and this came up months ago with the concept that we didn't feel like we had clear direction of how we would delineate between a commercial building, a large commercial building, and an industrial use. And we didn't think in general that we needed to make an industrial use have the same requirements that we would expect from a big box store coming in. Because they're 2 different kinds of uses. So personally, I kind of like to scale back a little bit on what the requirements are, but so I guess I don't mind if we don't have the base body and cap. Because I'm trying to stay true to the original intent of this, that there's a differentiation between an industrial use and a commercial use. But I like the rest of the stuff we put out there as far as the office areas, all the other, the entries, the defined entrance area, all those other things. So it's not a hill I'm gonna die on. As far as whether or not it has to have those 3 layers.
So if you look at 3B, which is on bottom of page 9, this would be just the kind of commercial building architecture. The building shall possess architectural variety, but enhance the overall cohesive community character. Scale and proportion of existing structures in the area should be considered. Roof shape and material shall be architecturally compatible with adjacent buildings and enhance the dominant street. Well, that's all nice and fuzzy.
Yes.
I don't think it gives any direction.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, it's very loose.
So we could keep that language. We could add that language straight to the industrial section. The base body and cap language came from my desire to see buildings more like Jade Farms and less like the storage buildings across the street. I think at the very minimum, it gives them a basic idea of what we're looking for. After speaking with Mr. Moore, I think it's probably appropriate to throw in some additional language about other alternatives, are acceptable. But at the very least, we're saying, hey, look, can't be slab sided, gotta have these basic elements or something else. And if it doesn't, if they submit a slab sided building, you can say, okay, that's not similar to base body and cap. We're not gonna find that to be an acceptable architectural.
Is there a way to add language in there that says or similar? I mean, I don't know what the technical term would be, because I agree that we need something that enhances the design of the building, but if somebody comes up with something clever that make our city look good, I would be open to that, and I don't want to be shut down because we tied them too close in an ordinance, right?
I'd probably use the words comparable quality.
I'd be willing to add that in there, comparable quality. Cause I don't think the base is my hill to die on, but I do like the idea of an outline to make something stand out a little bit.
Mr. Moore, what do you think? Comparable quality, do you? So I'm just a little concerned about the word quality, cause it.
Who's gonna decide what's comparable?
Well,
It'd be us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, right.
But the word quality to me means, you know, a higher grade diamond versus.
We just don't want flimsy vinyl on the
Design
side. We
standard.
want something that's significant.
Design standards? Yeah.
Whatever.
Comparable quality of design standard.
Well, no, get rid of quality, comparable design standard. But again,
What does that
Yeah.
mean
you're
though?
the, none of it means anything.
Design
Well,
standards.
that's what I'm
It
saying.
all- It
I wanna
all
make-
means
I
that.
mean, our
the
goal is to
plan-
clear this up,
yeah.
right? To make sure that when somebody starts proposing something, that they're not coming to us 3 or 4 times, that they
Right.
can say, they can look at this ordinance and say, all right, we got some clear definition of what we need to do. They can come in front of us and maybe we gotta say, all right, it's not quite there in one time rather than 3 or 4 times. And we've seen that before.
In the end, though, if we're going to permit something else that isn't quite exactly what we spelled out for them, then we're going to be subjective, so we need to have a word or set of words that allows us to be subjective. So there's gonna be some weasel words in there. so we can-
No, I agree with that. Yeah. I just wanna make sure we make it as clear as we possibly can, right? While still allowing wiggle room, because I do agree that we do need a lot of that wiggle room. I think it's vitally important, but we also want to give them some direction of what that wiggle room might include. I know that doesn't make it easier for anybody in this conversation, but
In general, it seems like if we set the minimums
yeah,
and then allow people to go beyond the minimums, that seems to be the easiest way to handle most options that are out there. That way we're not pushed beyond our minimums.
So one thing I am a little concerned about is when you read this language, it's very easy to apply it to a building similar to Jade Farms. You know, be 100 feet long, 80 feet wide. With the development of the city's business park, it is possible we could have a 1,000,000 square foot building. I don't think you're gonna be able to put a cap on a 1,000,000 square foot building in the way that this is being envisioned. So if they're not capable of putting a cap on it, then I think the comparable design standards or something they'd have to make up for the lack of a cap. With probably more vertical, horizontal design characteristics, which make you forget about the cap, I guess. Enough change in the color, material, pattern, profile, texture, etc. To make it a distinctive building. So I think we should probably add some language there. Mr. Collins put a weasel words to make sure that there's some subjective.
Does that give you what you need for this issue, or we have more we have to cover?
Or do you feel like that's enough to give us some options for language on that one? C2 specifically?
Yeah, I think so. We'll, I have too many other suggestions at this point, and that's really my only concern. Making sure that we have the necessary flexibility to prove it.
Okay, into C3, the next section there, I included erosion resistant metal panels, minimum of 26 gauge, 0.018 inches, 48 millimeters thickness, etc. I think this board is comfortable and willing to allow metal panels, prefab metal panels. We've done that in the past. Do you guys think it's a good idea to have the minimum gauge thickness levels in there?
I mean, I don't know the difference, so I guess I can't speak from a place of knowledge. I mean, we obviously want something that can handle a little bit of damage and somebody just lightly bunking into a car or whatever, but
So
I
when
mean, is that something that can handle that? I've no frame of reference here.
So basically, when I was researching this ordinance, I Googled what's the standard, you know,
Yeah.
thickness of a metal panel. And that's what I came up with. Now, the problem was, a gauge apparently is measured differently than inches thickness or millimeters thickness. So I tried to make sure that, we had multiple standards there,
Mhm.
so that we could properly measure.
And it's not super thick that you got there. I mean, I don't claim to have expertise with tons of metal work. I'm not, but half a millimeter is half the width of a dime. It's not very thick.
So I just Googled thickness of metal building walls. And first answer, how thick is a metal building wall? 26 gauge is the industry standard for commercial and residential applications.
Enough.
The American Iron and Steel Institute set the standards for steel gauge and metal thickness. 26 gauge galvanized steel sheets have an average thickness of 0.0187.
I'm good then.
What about-
Because we're gonna who's got a pop can up against the side of the building, I think.
No.
Right?
Now, of course, we could very well say, you know what, we're gonna go with the higher standard here, say something different, 24. I think the smaller you get, the thicker you get, right?
You do, yeah.
That's isn't this, would industrial buildings be different than a commercial building?
We're talking about industrial buildings.
That's what I'm saying. You just said commercial.
Residential, commercial standard is that.
Yeah, that's
Either
what you
the
said, the residential or commercial.
Or may not be that.
So I'm just saying is industrial more.
We all agree that whatever the industry standard for commercial buildings is, or sorry, industrial buildings is
Yeah.
fine with what we.
Yeah.
So if you find that that's more than that, probably don't wanna go less.
No,
Then we need to change it, but we're probably not gonna get the answer to that in the middle of this meeting.
yeah, you can, yeah.
Yeah, and then we just do that with the minimum of whatever that standard is, and I think we're good there, right? Yeah.
I mean, that's the number I came up with when I did the research, you know, 6 months ago or whatever.
As long as you don't find anything contradicting that, you know, if you take another look at it and you don't find any contradiction of it, great, you got your numbers. If you find something contradicting it, then what we want is the standard.
For industrial, yeah.
And you can change accordingly if you find it.
I mean, not to add weasel words or anything, but we could say 20, what do I have in here, 26 gauge? You put 26 gauge or industry standard. If they can prove that industry standard is something different to what 26 gauge would be.
Well, if 26 gauge is less than what the industry standard is, then they get the option of putting less than the industry standard.
26 gauge or industry standard if
Whatever is greater.
with a higher quality.
However, that's something that I'm super concerned about.
Yeah,
As long as we're trying to apply the industry standard, whatever that is. We're not trying to come up with some special weird thing yet. We're using our Cedar Springs. I mean, we have enough.
You
of those.
sure? We have enough
of
weird
those.
things
we
as it
also
is.
wanna make sure that it's something they can easily get
Exactly.
at whoever's gonna be providing the material to build the building. We don't wanna have them have to
Yeah, say
ship from
28 gauge and they don't even make it, you
16
know?
states
Yeah.
away just
Yeah.
to
You
build.
wanna
a
make it 26.374 gauge.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking. We don't want anything that's insane. It's not gonna cost us to
Right.
Build something, right?
Is there an apothecary version of that?
Excuse me.
Are you guys comfortable with subsection 4? That's the part about, materials are susceptible to damage, vehicles, including a sidewalk, old curb, landscaping. It's all kind of designed to prevent, the building from getting damaged, as you know. These places don't want to replace damaged sections of wall. They can get away with it.
And it's going to break up visually because you're either going to have masonry of some sort, or you're going to have, landscaping of some sort that's gonna
Mhm.
break up the bottom visually, so we get that as well.
Yeah, I think I'm good with that.
So the whole thing about minimal corporate colors, places like McDonald's have red and yellow symbols. I don't know if red and yellow would be permissible under our ordinance, which prohibits high intensity colors.
McDonald's red and yellow.
Yes. I think so. Or Loom with their bright purple building.
Hmm.
Which, by the way, this board did not approve of that. This board approved of exposed brick on that building. And for some reason, it got painted purple. Different story. There's actually a place, I think it's in New Mexico, where McDonald's couldn't get their building approved up for red and yellow, so it's got like green and purple or something. Look it up online. Anyways, any issues with the corporate colors?
Mm.
And any issues with the exterior walls utilizing windows to provide natural light to the interior of the building? That's most of the ordinance.
All of it.
I guess we'll make these minimal changes. I'll try to bring it back to you in a more complete actual ordinance form, that you guys make a recommendation to the city council.
Okay. Then I guess the next thing on the agenda here would be 10B, review and discuss the minimum maximum parking requirements in the zoning ordinance for commercial and industrial uses. So that appears to start on page 13, I think.
So I had just a teensy amount of time this month, and I see what I did here on page 13. You have one, which I think is the current language, and then I have 1A, which is possible proposed language. That would, I think, give you guys a little bit more flexibility with allowing a site plan that goes below the minimum standard. So, planning commission shall determine the minimum number of spaces required for accessory off-street parking by applying the parking standard. That's all the same. The schedule of parking requirements for the various uses or other applicable provisions of this chapter. Also the same provisions of site amenities that reduce motor vehicle parking requirements and written information provided by the site plan applicant. So those are reasons why you could go below the minimum standards. The planning commission must state its reasoning or explanation for approving of a site plan that provides for less than the minimum standard. Minimum number of parking spaces as determined by the schedule of parking requirements. In other words, applicant can provide you with information, and if it's below what your standards otherwise state, you guys have to make a statement on the record why you are convinced that there should be a departure from the minimum standards otherwise required. And it's kind of awkward language. I might be able to clean it up a little bit, but that's kind of the intent. It's stronger language than you have now. And this board has shown that it's willing to work with applicants on the number of otherwise required parking spaces. Mr. Moore?
I am personally always supportive of adding more plan. There are a lot of instances where it requires way more than is ever needed. Sometimes by certain amount, so they kind of address that. I think is a good thing. It is important to require the applicant to demonstrate your satisfaction with what they're proposing. It also even goes so far as to provide planning commission with the authority to require more. They say, I only need 5 spaces, and it was 35, and all of a sudden over parking is part of the street.
So we do have a provision of the ordinance for deferred parking. So we could require them to show on the site plan where the deferred parking would go.
Yeah, I think that helps. So. We have bird parking, bike parking, helps offset vehicle parking sometimes, especially for things that are in the trail. So. I think this is probably the flexibility that you see here, so like, when you already have language in here that you, that's anyone going with the maximum of the, that's they're already kind of locked into a maximum. But it does allow it enables you to clear them.
Do you have any thoughts, comments, questions, or concerns about the language I've provided?
No,
Yeah, I
aside
think,
from basic wordsmithing type of thing.
so we'll work on wordsmithing that unless the board has any specific thoughts.
I like it. It gives us ability to kind of, instead of just pulling something out of the ether about what we think is gonna work, this gives us a kind of a clear framework of, okay, we can kind of see and you can kind of see how these requirements wouldn't work, but here's exactly the conditions that we have to follow if we're going to give you this, and here's what we might ask for in order to offset. That's kind of built in there, and we haven't really had that.
So the site plan you guys reviewed with the Jimmy Johns was fairly convincing to me that, you know, not so much the applicant, but looked at 4 or 5 other Jimmy Johns in the area and found that, you know, ours required like 30 spaces, everyone else had 20 spaces. I think that's probably enough information for you guys to be convinced. But also things like, okay, you got a Jimmy John's on one side and the retail store on the other. They're sharing a parking lot, but you know, Jimmy John's is busy at 6 PM, retail's busy at 6 AM or something like that. I think that type of information, which is not part of your parking standards, is probably useful for you guys to make those determinations. So I think this language gives you a lot more flexibility, but you know, I agree it probably could be wordsmithed a little bit better. So again, I think this one's fairly compact. I don't think there's a whole lot else that we need to change if we make that specific change. Because it would leave your scheduled parking requirements in place. There'd be no modifications necessary there. Maximum parking, probably also is fine. And deferred parking is also in there. So if we propose that change, I think we can probably call it a day on the parking. So I might be able to bring that back to you guys again next time for a recommendation.
We have to have a public hearing.
We would, yeah. We might be past the dates already. So as you guys know, the Cedar Springs Post is no longer operating. I have not personally spoken with, I believe, the Rockford Squires who we're gonna go with. So I don't know what their schedule is for advertising. So we might be past the November date at this point. So whenever the next available one would be.
So the next thing on the agenda is 10C, discussion on solar energy systems, and I'm scrolling through lots of parking requirements to get to that.
This would start at 21.
Page 21.
So I did not get a lot of time, or any time really, to address an actual policy. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that, an actual ordinance. So instead, what I did was I wrote down kind of how I've been addressing these as they pop up. You'll see that in the policy I wrote up at page 35. So it's fairly simplistic. Basically, I've only required that the solar panels be, can't see this because apparently flush mount has a specific meaning in the industry, which is not exactly what I'm requiring. But basically that they, you know, are on the roof and not, you know, mounted, what's a good word for it, at a high angle from the roof. In other words, flush mounted to the roof. So I guess on one hand, you guys understand the language that I've used in this policy. Do you have any objections to it, at least for a policy that I'm currently operating with until we get to a point where we have an ordinance in place? Or any suggestions for?
Are you gonna make it kind of like the HVAC ordinance where they gotta have it, can't be visible?
I don't think it's possible to do that.
Okay.
Obviously, the whole point of solar is to be visible to the sun.
I get that.
Um, I just don't want it angled in a strange way from the roof. I think the.
Or mounted on the side of a building. Yeah, I get that.
I think the public is willing to accept them as a roof covering.
Mhm.
But I think if we're going to allow them as a solar array, like as a accessory use of property, so it's out in the yard or something. Or having them tilt up and down, throughout the day, which might cause reflection issues, especially in the residential district. I think those are things we might have to address by ordinance. But for the time being, I'm saying, we'll allow you to mount them this way. I just want to make sure that the language I've used is appropriate and understandable.
My only quibble is at the end of your language where it says all solar panel installations shall obtain building electrical permit. Is that stopping someone from using a low voltage solar panel that they might want to mount on something like that? That obviously wouldn't need a building inspector to run a 12-volt system.
So it's easy enough to throw in some language about high voltage versus low voltage.
If you're not connecting it to your interior circuitry, and you're just using it for exterior lighting or something like that, it seems like a building permit would be kind of overkill.
I know I have a camera on my house. It's powered completely with solar.
Sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep, no, certainly not the intention of this policy, so I will add some language to that effect. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? We've had a number of these be installed recently. This is the first year this has actually come up, so it's just been interesting. But independent bank.
I foresee this being something that we're gonna see more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the solar parking lots are something we're gonna have to look at as well. Because I can see a want for it because you can combine your electric vehicle charging with solar structures that are in the parking lot that also provide shade.
I think you're optimistic about the amount of electricity that a solar panel creates in comparison to how much electric car chargers need.
Oh, I know that, but also they're not solely solar charged. It's an opportunity for the business to get energy credits. It's an opportunity for the business to, it's happening. It's already happening in the Southwest. The only reason it's not happening here is because we have less sun. But I was reading an article just today about how the efficiency of the solar panels are going up to the point where starting to make sense to do in the Midwest.
I was gonna say that as technology advances, it'd be nice to be in front of it. I think photovoltaics will continue to advance. They have for 15 years.
Yeah. One thing, I know this is kind of off the wall, but growing up, my dad always pointed to the center of the highway and said, if we could just grow potatoes or something there, we could feed the world. And I think nowadays, if we could just put photovoltaic cells in the middle of the highway median, how much electricity would we create? But same thing with houses and banks and whatever else, if we start plastering the world with these things.
I think we could probably handle it as it comes up. I mean, there's talk of photovoltaic parking surfaces, so, and roadways, so.
Sure.
Those are all experimental, I think, at this point.
But I guess the question for right now is I've got a policy that I'm using to address it as it comes up. At some point, we may need to get into an actual ordinance. I'm not sure, Mr. Moore, have you done solar ordinance? So at least one of us here has some experience.
Yeah, and this policy here addresses most of what we put into, ordinance. So we read the ordinance that typically there's both a utility scale and a small scale version of that. You have land for the utility scale system here, but certainly there's gonna be people like if you can't look at their backyard, rooftop panels, and I think pretty much everything that's in the policy is what it's showing. height and location, front yard, rear yard, side yard type stuff. But I think there's zoning amendments to your guys. It is that exempt the very least.
So do you guys want to see a sample ordinance from one of the half dozen other communities that he's already done this for, and then we can start from there?
That'd be helpful. Let's see what other people are doing.
Okay. Item D is a motion to recommend to the city council that it was the intent of ordinance 216, or that, well, I think the verbiage is weird here, but that the intent of ordinance 216 was to remove the table of uses from chapter 32. 60. You'll have to remind me what this
Absolutely.
is, because I don't remember what 216 is.
Okay, so, this is going way back, Mr. Johnson. Previously, the city had 7 pages of, this is what's permitted in the R1 district, check mark, check mark. And we determined that that was a very, poorly done and hard to understand policy or ordinance. So we, instead kind of put them into their own individual sections. Now, if you want to open up a business in the B3 district, you go to B3, here's what's permitted. I found it much easier to use. However, when we recodified, and we sent all of our ordinances to the attorneys, obviously they weren't part of the discussion that we had about the intention of, the new ordinance was to get rid of the old ordinance. And despite my best efforts, going back and reading through the actual ordinance that was passed, there is no reasonable way to read it to get rid of the old ordinance. Now, if you actually compare them side by side, they actually contradict each other in many, many ways. So I want the board to make the statement that it was their intention, despite what the ordinance actually says, that we eliminated the old ordinance table, I guess you can call it, and was replaced by ordinance 216, which is what I consider to be the current ordinance, which I've been using for the last 3 or 4 years.
So just cleaning up an old mess, basically.
Pretty much.
I'll make the motion unless you, well, I'll make the
Go right ahead.
motion, if we have any discussion, we can have it, but so I'll make the motion to recommend to city council that it was our intent that ordinance 216 was to remove the table of uses from chapter 32, article 3, division 1, section 32-160.
I'll support.
Any discussion? It's fascinating stuff.
Mhm.
Hearing none, all in favor, please signify with aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed? Motion carries. Yay. All right, item E. Discussion on the advisory request from, I don't want to say that name. On the Yenaho Style Properties. You tell me what it really is supposed to say.
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it either, and I apologize for that.
Okay,
Nice gal, but I can't pronounce her name. So this is regarding the old Roundup property, which has been shuttered for many years now. Just north of City Hall, it's got the old ramp that was on Main Street with a little covered overall. Anyway. Essentially what we have is we have this developer who wants to come in, knock the building down, put a retail space on the first floor and then 4 apartments above it. Under the city's ordinances, all dwellings must have 2 parking spaces on the property of the development in order to develop the apartments. So what I've been trying to do is, tell these folks, hey, look, you've got X number of dwellings. At the very minimum, you're going to have to put as many parking spaces as you possibly can on your property. And that's what she did. She put as many parking spaces as she reasonably could fit there, and came up with 6. Well, it means she's missing 2. So there is a provision in the ordinance that would allow the applicant to, I believe the word is lease, parking spaces from the city, for use for their dwelling. Now, as you guys are likely aware, we have lots of second-story apartments up and down Main Street, which do not have on-site parking. We also have an ordinance in the books that says if you are a business in the downtown, you can count some of your parking off-site to go to your minimum parking standard. Now, not to get too deep into the weeds, but I think it actually says up to 60% of your required parking. But if I were to actually do that on a day-to-day basis as an administrator, we could never have a new business in downtown. So my policy over the last several years has been to basically say, unless you are going to be some mega parking spot user, I'm not going to require you to indicate where your parking is going to be, so long as you're within a reasonable distance of a municipal parking lot. So this property is within reasonable distance of multiple municipal parking lots. So the question is whether this board is willing to entertain a development that requires 8 parking spaces and is only providing 6, given the, I guess, status of the language in the ordinance.
Where municipal parking lots allow overnight parking?
They do. Now, at some point, I might like to have a conversation with the city council about maybe requiring a parking pass for overnight parking. Because otherwise we do have a number of downtown apartment dwellers who just park their cars and which is ultimately bad for business. And any amount of money that is coming from a parking pass to go back into the maintenance of parking. But that's a discussion for a future date. So, given the language that we discussed previously about allowing the city planning commission to accept, I guess, information from developers regarding the minimum number of parking spaces. Is this board willing to, I guess, at least hear a site plan that cannot come up with the minimum number of dwelling parking spaces?
He's asking to possibly lease spaces though from the city. I'm open to that.
Leave with the letter in the order.
That's what I'm looking at. I just want to make sure what I was reading and seeing was the same. I'd be open to it if there's enough, if that's part of the discussion.
So, again, not to get too far into it, but at least the discussions I've had with this developer is that she would intend, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but intend for 3 of the apartments to be full-time, rented apartments for people to live in. The 4th one would be a Airbnb style for those of us who want to visit, sunny downtown Cedar Springs on a, I guess, weeknightly basis. And she would anticipate that those persons would then be told to find a free parking space to park in. So I don't know if it's true, and I don't know if there's a way for us to really regulate that. But at least that was her stated.
Yeah. I have no problem with an Airbnb, but I think having a designated parking space for that specific dwelling would be something I would like to see.
So the only problem with allowing or requiring a designated parking space is now everybody and their mother would like to have the city designate their specific parking space. We've got dozens of apartments on Main Street where we don't do that.
Is now the opportunity to start doing that though, to make sure that as our city expands and grows, which I feel confident it will, to eliminate some of those issues as people sell and buy those new properties with those apartments, we can have them fall within line of this ordinance.
Sounds an awful lot like a policy discussion for the city council.
All right.
Because I would imagine, in addition to the many, many other things I do, this would make some people grumpy.
I'm just thinking about the future of our city and where it's gonna go. I mean, I don't know if that's 50 years from now or 20 years from now, but I just want to make sure that we're smart with our parking spaces and the space that we have.
Well, the American dream is everybody has a motor vehicle, right?
Mhm.
It's possible, and I would say even probably likely, that some of these people don't have two cars. Probably bicycles, motorcycles, other options.
Yep.
So you guys, again, could say, okay, well, if you're not gonna have the required number of parking spaces, you're gonna have to have bicycle storage, you're gonna have to do something else. I honestly don't know, this might be a discussion for the city attorney's office, but maybe you could buy your way out of parking spaces. So the city is likely to put in a new municipal parking lot in the next 2 to 3 years. Southwest of where the brewery is currently located. It's gonna cost $100,000 plus to do that. Maybe we say, okay, instead of having the required number of parking spaces, you're gonna put $5,000 or $10,000 towards municipal parking. And then that way we could say, okay, well, yeah, they're gonna be taking up 1 or 2 parking spaces that would otherwise be, required of her. And say, well, you're gonna send your people to a municipal parking lot that you help pay for.
It's an annual fee or a one-time?
It'd be nice to be an annual fee.
Well, I know, it seems steep for an or annual fee, but I could,
No, this would be part of the site plan, so you
Right.
can buy your way out of it, but at this point, I don't know what authority we'd have to do that.
see, I'm keen to that too, as long as there's some place to make sure that we maintain those parking lots to the level that we want to have our city maintained at. I'm open to that. And I also think that the nature of travel might change as cars become autonomous. But I don't know when that's gonna occur. I think it'll move from ownership to service at some point in our lives, but I don't know. Again, if that's 20 years or 50 years, when that becomes a change in mindset.
There's an appreciable difference for me between a person who's coming and visiting a business for a defined amount of time and then leaving versus a person who's going to live there and potentially have a car there 24/7. So the use of the space is much harder for those people that are living there. So I would be open again to if there is a rental or a lease fee for the continued use of a parking space for an apartment in the downtown. Because you could then direct them to park here and not park in this other place that's blocking the building and things like that. And it's a revenue stream.
So I don't disagree with you. But you could also make the argument that, okay, most people who are gonna be living in an apartment, they're gonna have jobs. Most jobs are 9 to 5. So these people are likely to be driving somewhere else from 9 to 5. And during 9 to 5, the customers of the businesses in the downtown will be using those parking spaces, which is the intention. And then, of course, after 5 o'clock, those persons come home and most of the people going to that shop are not going to the shop anymore. Of course, that's not what I hear in my office all day. There's apparently no parking in the city. I don't know if you guys knew that or not.
Yeah. There's no parking within 10 feet of where they want to be at that moment.
2 feet.
Yeah.
Where they wanna be. So, yes, so at the very least, it sounds like you guys are willing to hear from this developer and that's a possibility, although you don't know the solution yet. Or do you have any input on this?
It's a difficult discussion. In general, I am. Think that parking. Flexibility. Public spaces to the arrangement or something. Thinking of the cars to serve an apartment use or a retail use that might keep them. I want to see downtown Cedar Springs filled with separate buildings and residences, apartments, everything else. And the more of that we have, and the more flexibility and cooperation, change over and things like that, we can encourage them to facilitate parking, maximize what we have. This is the finance space. So if you want to vital downtown, you need to go with those.
would point out that I've had this, brief discussion with a property owner in the downtown, possibility of charging a monthly fee to park in our municipal parking lots. And the comment was, well, back in, 1950, whatever, the Smith boys donated that property to the city for eternal free parking, and, that's why this was approved of, because we had free parking there, what, blah, 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 blah. I asked if there was any writing to that effect. No, that's just the way it was. So, I suspect we're going to, come up against that problem, that the people who currently benefit from the arrangement of no fees are obviously going to want that to continue.
Well, it can be something that I was looking at from a fairness point of view, if we give this deal to this person, that we're gonna say, here are your parking spots that are city spots, that we then have to apply that to the other people in the area. But we could also, I guess, use the approach of any new development that comes in and gradually create this standard.
Mm.
Unfortunately, I find people don't want fairness.
Liberty for me, but not.
Yes,
Yes.
they want fairness for everybody else, but they want to be exempted from fairness.
Oh, yeah.
That was my thought too, was as we, add
Go
this as
forward.
people, as we go forward, right? We gotta start somewhere sometimes, and unfortunately, this is the person we start with, this is the person we start with.
Mhm.
It could also be a phased-in approach.
Further, the city facility. The property owner. This property owner, first look like banks for. Sometimes it's like the bullet. And able to encourage. Property owner A to work with property owner. Possibly other alternatives that don't directly involve cities that get its own parking for that kind of use, but that's of course, that route is fraught with other issues potentially if you're not involved, so you don't know. There might be like, there might be excessive, parking in some of it, probably not a lot, there might be.
Okay. So is that city parking behind them then?
So that's what I was gonna get to, is
It's like an alleyway.
the alleyway there is owned by the DDA.
Okay.
But for anybody who walks through there, it's not the best maintained. I wonder if maybe we could, in exchange for you repainting all the lines and running a street sweeper through there or something, that we could, allow them use of those parking spaces.
Mhm.
Not a guaranteed, perpetual use, but
Right.
approval through the,
I mean, cause it's real close. It's,
yeah, approval through the planning commission in exchange for, some work being done in conjunction with your development, on the city's property.
that would have to be every business that's on there then, right? Or,
Which they would never agree to.
right.
Yeah, I think there's some possibilities here.
I wouldn't mind the leasing, if it's right there, you know what I mean?
Well, okay, so the language says leasing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that necessarily has to involve the exchange of money.
Money,
on a monthly
right.
basis. That could be a word that we simply use to do one of these other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we had the opportunity to have this discussion without it being directly applicable to just this person while they have their site plan. Because it's kind of hard to separate the big picture from the thing we have at the moment. So.
They opened the box by putting it in there is what I wasn't even thinking about this until it was in that letter. So it does give us something to think about.
Yeah, I think you'll like this applicant. She's easy to work with, smart, and she's got good plans. So I will make contact with her and we'll bring her project to you.
Okay, which takes us to open discussion of issues not on the agenda, correspondence. We have the same calendar that we always have in there. And then it looks like the letters of support from Jimmy John's last time.
Yeah, so it actually arrived, I think, the day of the previous hearing and didn't make it into your agenda. Something I would point out, the 2022 calendar, we are getting towards the end of the year. We do ask, probably November or December to start laying out your agenda, your meeting schedule for next year. So start looking at your calendar, see if there's anything that really does not work for you, holidays, school stuff, any dates that you think would not work for you. I know that I've got a class lined up that I think will have to push a city council meeting 1 month or 1 week. So please take a look. And then Cloud Canvas Development Permit Extension. If you guys will recall, the AFC home over on West Street. They had 1 year to develop. They did not meet that requirement, and so they had to come back and ask you guys for an extension. Same thing here, except it would have expired about 3 weeks ago for your meeting. So I said, well, when are you planning on opening? And they said probably mid-October. So I figured 3 weeks between friends, you guys probably wouldn't fire me for extending that permit for them. Okay.
He did bring it to me and I said, hell no. Oh, I mean, yes, that's.
We need to have a discussion here about this.
Yeah. So, staff comments, city manager and city clerk, all in one.
Yeah, just a couple minor things. So again, Mr. Conley, you and I have talked about the family farm and home. You guys are familiar with the Tractor Supply Company. They've got some kind of exterior outdoor storage that they're permitted. That was long before me. I worked out a previous, I think, city 30. So family farm and home, they've been doing a lot of that as well, except they don't have an agreement in place. So I'm hoping to kind of come to a meeting of the minds where we allow them a certain amount of outdoor storage in exchange for whatever to make it look nice. There is one minor issue regarding the greenhouse I'm trying to resolve right now, but at some point I'll probably bring that to you for your blessing. I don't want to go through a 12 round special land use, but just to make sure that I'm not thinking crazy and doing things on behalf of the planning commission that you guys can approve of. As I indicated immediately prior to the meeting, the apartment complex might be looking to change kind of their how they've got their building situated. But the city council has to work out the utilities on that project. Talked with Mr. Ladwig regarding the Jimmy John's. He's indicated he expects that store to open before the end of the year. And then also the land in front of the family farm and home. I spoke with that developer. They're a little confused is not the right word, but they are a little not quite sure of what is currently permitted by them or not. If you guys will recall, you approved of a drive-through facility and a Moana store there. Both of those businesses withdrew. So this developer is now saying, well, it's okay for me still to put a drive-through in there, right? Well, as far as I'm concerned, drive-throughs are individual and all of them are special land uses. So since the building is not built, I'm of the opinion that they need to provide the proposed user of a drive-through. And then if they provide something that is acceptable to you, then the plans that were already approved are likely to be approved again. But that's a decision for you guys to make, not for me. He did float the idea of a coffee shop. And I said, well, there's only one other major coffee shop that's not already in town. And I'm not sure that that lot is big enough for that proposed use. So that may come back to you at some point. And just wanted to give you guys a heads up. And I guess as city clerk, I have nothing else to add.
Planning commission members, any comments? Thank you. Welcome back again. I think I said that already, Mr. Moore, but nice to have you in person. And then city council representative, I guess that would be you.
I don't know. I don't have a whole lot to report. We're still trying to work on that apartment complex. Trying to figure out ins and outs of what to do. Someone I guess is not wanting to absorb any costs, so, we don't know what else to do with that, but I'm sure we'll talk about it next week. I think that's about it, isn't it?
And report of planning consultant.
For report at this time, I guess one observation I would make is that earlier mentioned that interested in Airbnb downtown. I don't know if there's currently an ordinance on Airbnb, there's more activity in. Yeah, the local authority, and whether or not you could, do the call.
Called Mark Heisinger's office and told him, no.
You get a lot of those emails.
Idiotic law, but they keep pushing.
Pretty sure he's got our phone number blocked, but.
Mine too, yes.
They've been talking about this. Everyone has like trying, so they're watching.
Okay, well, we're all set then with that. We're adjourned. Not bad.
Thank you.
I knew this was gonna have an open-ended night. It wasn't gonna be super fast, but. Got through a lot of stuff. Me. Yeah,